Okay, we are on Lamed Daled Amud Beis 34b, and we are discussing Kalev's detour. Right, the spies are scouting the land with their ill intent, more of which we'll discuss soon. And the verse states, and he went up to Chevron, indicating that one person left the pack to go to Chevron. And considering that later, the Torah tells us that Kalev inherited Chevron because of his strength, because of his spirit, Ruach Acheres Ha'isayima, he had a different spirit with him. So we can conclude that Kalev is the one that went to Chevron. What was he doing in Chevron? So we discussed yesterday that he was speaking to our forefathers who are buried there, asking them to invoke from Hashem that he had the strength to withstand the peer pressure of the spies. Then the Gemara went on to analyze the verse, which continued to describe who he met there. And the pasuk says he met three people: Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. Right? Did I pronounce that correctly? I think so. And the Gemara discussed their names. Either the names indicate their strength, or somehow the names tell us that they built some other cities. And the verse describes these three people as Yelidei Ha'anak, children of the, quote, Anak. And Anak, you could say is a name, and that's the father of these three people. Or, as the Gemara tells us, that it means something deeper to describe their size. That the sun looked like their necklace. That's how big they were. And the word Anak is linked to a description of how you put a thread through gems or pearls of Mother Nature. That's where we left off. Now the verse goes on to continue to describe the nature of Chevron itself. And this is how the pasuk describes it. The Chevron Sheva Shonim Nivnisa. And Chevron was literally built 7 years. But the phrasing Nivnisa is an interesting phrasing. It doesn't say explicitly what it means. Was it built 7 years ago? Was it built? Did it take 7 years to build? The text is not very clear. Moreover, it says Sheva Shonim Nivnisa. It was built 7 year before Tzoyan Mitzrayim. So what does it mean built before Tzoyan, which is in Mitzrayim? And why is it relevant to tell us that it was built 7 years before Tzoyan in Mitzrayim? And that's what the Gemara goes on to discuss now. My Nivnisa, what is the meaning of Nivnisa? It was built 7 years prior to Tzoyan. What's the meaning of this? It says the Gemara Ilim and Nivnisa Mamish, if you want to suggest that perhaps it means literally it was built 7 years prior to Tzoyan. It's just a description. Now, the Gemara doesn't ask the question directly, but it would seem implicit in the Gemara's discussion. Why is it relevant to know that it was built 7 years before Tzoyan? Who cares? That's not the Gemara's direct question, but it seems implicit in the way the Gemara discusses this. We'll see. But the way the Gemara asks it is like this. Would someone build a home for his younger son before his older son? What is this referring to? This is referring to the children of Cham. Cham, one of the children of Noach, he had children, right, who then became founders of nations. And Cham, as it were, built and situated his children in these various different locations. So Canaan, Cham's youngest son, Canaan, settled in the land of Israel. Whereas his other children, one of whom is Mitzrayim, is settled in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, which is where Tzoyan is. So Mitzrayim, Mr. Mitzrayim, not the country Mitzrayim. Mr. Mitzrayim is older, is a middle child, but is older than Mr. Canaan. Now here the verse is saying that Chevron which is in the land that Chum gives to Canaan, is built 7 years before the land given to Mr. Mitzrayim, the land Zion. So why would someone do that? Why would someone build a home for his younger child 7 years before he built a home for his older child? That's the Gemara's way of asking the question. And therefore, to state that the verse is saying literally that Chevron is built 7 years before Mitzrayim, before Tzoyan, doesn't sound right. And therefore, says the Gemara, Ella, rather, Shahaya Mavuna, it was fruitful, changing the meaning of the word Nivnisa, no longer literally built, but rather Mavuna, changing around the word a little bit, coming from the root word to be fruitful, or the way Rashi explains it, why Mavuna is fruitful. Mavuna means it builds out, as opposed to it was built. Read it builds out, as in it produces fruit. Al echad mishiva b'tzayan. 7 times the amount that Tzayan produces. And that's what the verse is trying to tell us. That Chevron is such a wonderful place. You have these 3 massive people, plus the fruit there, the produce, is 7 times that of Tzayan. How is that helpful to tell us, like, why is Tzayan a reference? Why is Tzayan a good reference to tell us how much production there is in Chevron? So that's what we're going to explain. The Gemara is going to, that's right. So the Gemara is going to take us down the logic as to why Tzayan becomes the indicator as to the production rate of Israel, specifically Chevron.
Did you say those people don't have sons?
So the people. Sorry. Ask again.
You said Ham, Mitzrayim.
No, Chum is Noach's son, and Chum's children.
H-A-M.
Yeah, or C-H-A-M, Chesmem, one of Noach's children, and his children are Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. That's the 4 mentioned in the verse quoted here. Canaan being the youngest, Mitzrayim being the second. And Tzayan, which is in Mitzrayim, would have been built by Chum for his son Mitzrayim, and Chevron, which is in the land of Israel, is built for his son Canaan, built by Chum.
If the ark landed in Turkey somewhere,
yeah,
how did they get to Israel?
It's not that far. People used to walk all the time from a place.
How did they know? There's no boundaries, there's no signs.
But they didn't call it Israel. They just said, okay, you go east, you go west, you go south, and build your homes. Or I'll send my people to build your homes, or I'll go build your homes. Didn't necessarily have boundaries like we do. Yeah. Anyway, it's a historical discussion when exactly national boundaries started and how it's evolved, because it used to be city-states, right? So you controlled your city, otherwise it was wild, right? Rome started to build out, before that even Alexander built out like regions. Anyway, not relevant. Okay, so the Gemara therefore says that the word nimnisa doesn't mean built, but rather it builds out, it is fruitful. 7 times the amount that Tzayan is. So now let's get to understanding how that is an indicator for the amount of production of Chevron. So says the Gemara, Ein lecha terashim, you don't have as many rocks or a rocky area. B'chol Eretz Yisrael, in all of Israel, Yesem Chevron, more than Chevron. Chevron's in there, right? You have been to Chevron? Anybody?
Up to the north, the Dead Sea, isn't it?
Chevron? No.
Yeah.
No, it's the West Bank.
So-called West Bank.
It's so-called West Bank, yeah. Right?
I always see photos. Dead Sea is here and Chevron is here.
All of Israel is very close. So when you look at the photos, anyway, if you've been there, the mountains are very rocky. They're like patched with rock.
I've been to the cabin in Shemal and I saw a picture of that one.
Yeah, and
that's as close as I've ever.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so there's no area in the whole of Israel that's more rocky than Chevron, and therefore Bishum de Kivri Bar Shechivi. And therefore, because of that, they chose that area for burial. Because you don't want to use fertile land for burial. You're ruining good real estate. Right? So they use the rocky area. That's why the Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov are buried there. Because why would you bury somewhere where you can produce?
That's the rocky area where they would send the from Jerusalem, where they would send like the scapegoat off the
I don't know.
the giant cliffs.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Maybe. Right. Okay. So on the one hand, you have the most non-fertile land in Israel is the area of Chevron. Sorry.
I was just saying, comment.
Yeah.
I think in the Gemara it mentions the distance between the temple and the Zaza. Maybe by that you could.
Yeah, you can deduce that. Yeah. Yeah. Where it would have been. Yeah. So the Einloch now. Okay, so Chevron is the least fertile area within Israel. Good. Now, you have no land that's more fertile than Mitzrayim, more than Mitzrayim. Right? Egypt has the Nile flowing up north through Egypt, and that's why they have high irrigation, and that's why they were wealthy, because they produced grain and shipped it to the rest of the world before Ukraine did that. That was a little Islamic joke. Oh, sorry?
What a filthy body of water.
It still irrigates the land, and that's all that matters. So they were very fertile, very wealthy. So you have nothing. Is Chevron being the most infertile of Eretz Yisrael, and Mitzrayim being the most fertile of all the lands. Shneimar, the verse reads, "Kegan Hashem ke'eretz Mitzrayim." And it's referring to Lot when he sees the Jordan, and it describes the amount of water overflowing, like the garden of God, like the land of Egypt. As if the land of Egypt is like this description of what it looks like to have a land filled with water and fertility. Now, the Einloch, sorry?
No, I see why this is leading up to the worst land.
That's right. That's right. The Einloch b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, Yosem Mitzayan. You have no place within Egypt that is better than Sayan. How do we know that? Because the verse reads in Isaiah, Kihayu Sayan Sarav. This is that the ministers of Pharaoh were in Sayan. And this is when the king of Israel sent, this is what Rashi tells us. The king of Israel sent messengers to Pharaoh to help him in his war against Ashur, the pact that was made there, with all the debacle that went around that. But they went to Tzoyan. Now, if they went to Tzoyan, that means Pharaoh situated his palace in Tzoyan. And therefore, we can assume that was the best of the land, because that's where he would put himself. So within Egypt, Tzoyan is the best. And even so, even though Tzoyan is the best of Egypt, which itself is the best of all lands, and Chevron is the least of all of Eretz Yisrael fertility-wise, which Eretz Yisrael to begin with is not known for its fertile land. Nonetheless, Chevron is still 7 times more fertile than Zion, indicating a divine blessing beyond what naturally should be there.
Is Zoan and Goshen, or those are separate areas?
Because Goshen is also considered fertile.
Goshen is very fertile. That's why they gave it.
Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't know the geographic location of Zion. We do know Goshen. Goshen is the region where the Nile meets the Mediterranean. It's that region. Goshen is the region that's where the Nile meets. And I'm stating that Goshen is the region where the Nile meets Mediterranean. So east of Alexandria. Alexandria is a little farther, closer to like.
That's where the Levites live.
That's where the Jewish people were, yeah. Goshen, yeah, that's right. That's where the Jews went with Jacob and the sons.
Jacob brought up, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the Gemara. Sorry?
Joseph designated that area for
That's
his
right.
father.
That's right. So he's asking if Tzayan is in that location, and I don't know. Maybe, probably, possibly. I'm not sure. Okay, so this is the Gemara. The Gemara is going to make a few more comments about this. and challenged the idea that Chevron is full of rocks and full of stone. But before that, just pointing out what would seem obvious. Obviously, there's a literal reading here that we're talking about the blessing that God gives the land of Israel to be as fertile as it is. The blessing still lasts till this very day. That with Egypt and all of its Nile, today does not produce as much as Israel does. I don't think so. I don't know what's the stats. I just made that up. But Israel does produce in incredible numbers produce,
Up until,
even though notwithstanding the lack of rain and the lack of overflowing Niles.
but
Sorry?
up until I think what, 48, it didn't produce anything for,
Well, the blessing comes to the Jewish people, right? It's not
correct. Yeah.
right. The blessing comes to the Jewish people, but clearly, I mean, look at the land of Israel and how it flourishes. Turned a desert into a place to produce fruits that are shipped all over the world. Here in regular random fruit stores, you can end up buying fruit from Israel. Not uncommon, especially oranges and other such things like that.
Don't find Jack oranges.
Not anymore. We used to find them all the time. They don't sell them anymore. Yeah.
They're so good.
Anyway, that's number one. But there's the obvious deeper reading here that we're juxtaposing the blessing of Israel to be 7 times that of Egypt. Egypt, the representation of immorality, and Israel and Chevron, especially where our forefathers are, as a representation of holiness. It's like almost blatant that the Gemara is describing Chevron as the antidote to the immorality of Egypt, right? The inverse, right? If Egypt is sunk into more immorality, and the height of Egypt being Zion is then the height of that immorality, then Eretz Yisrael, and then Chevron within Eretz Yisrael would be the height of spirituality and the antidote to that, which would explain the number 7, right? 7 divine emotions, 7 emotions correspond to the 7 divine attributes, right? 7 straps of tefillin, the 7 weeks of the Omer,
7 days of the week.
7 days a week, all of that. So this would be like and 7 times, right? It's like the full purification of all 7 attributes that may have been sunken in the height of Egypt is refined in the heights of Chevron.
Relationship between holiness and blessing.
The correlation with holiness blessing, right?
It still is-
And perhaps then, sorry,
It still is a big population.
sure, yeah. I assume it means not just the city of Chevron, but the outskirts and the yeah. And
That's Rabbi Danny, yeah?
today in Chevron, the Chabad Shaliach is Rabbi Danny, yeah. Wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was lucky enough to spend quite a bit of time with him back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in yeshiva, and both in Kfar Chabad and in Yerushalayim, I used to go spend Shabbos with him. And then we used to go a few times. Anyway, and this would be linked, of course, to our forefathers buried in Chevron, made reference to here, that even though it's a land with rocks, right? And rocks perhaps indicates a humility, right? It's dormant, it doesn't state its opinion, step on it, tread on it, it does its thing. Maybe that itself is linked to our forefathers who are buried there. That's the spiritual antidote to the arrogant emotions of the arrogant attributes of Egypt being refined by the humility, the rocks, and our forefathers that are in Chevron.
The cave is in Hebron.
The cave is in Chevron. You can go visit it still today. The cave is in Chevron.
I saw a video.
It's right in the center of the city.
There's
the old city.
There's a Chabad rabbi from, I think his name is Rappaport, if I'm not mistaken, from New Jersey.
Yeah.
Jersey Shore.
Yeah.
He was just in Israel last week, and he posted a video of he was at the caves. At the
I've been there multiple times. Multiple times. Okay, we could tell stories, but I don't want to
How far is
take time from
Hebron?
my Gemara. Sorry?
So how far is Hebron from where the spies were?
I don't know the distance. I don't know.
Kind of be a good distance.
You can jump on a camel. Take them a day. Israel's not that big. I have friends who have hiked the entire width and length of Israel. The whole thing took them.
Really?
Yeah. My friends who did it. And
As big as Vancouver Island.
yeah, it's not. You can do it in a week and a half, 2 weeks. It's not. Okay. The Gemara then now challenges the Chevron Terashim Hava. Is that what Chevron is like? Just full of rocks? Does it not state that at the beginning of Avshalom's rebellion against Chevron, against King David is situated in Jerusalem. He settles in Jerusalem, makes that as the capital. And the verse states, after 40 years, Avshalom tells his father, the king David, Elchana, let me go, etc. He says, let me go to Chevron, and there I'm going to fulfill my vow to offer offerings to Hashem. And then he goes there, and that's when he plots his rebellion. So, now why would he go to Chevron? The Mizbeach at this point is in the temple, which is in Givon, the temporary temple after Shiloh is destroyed. It's in Givon. So why would he say, I'm going to Chevron to fulfill my vow to bring offerings to God? He should be going to Givon. So says the Gemara, Avia explains, others say it wasn't Avia, it was Rabbi Bar Chanan who said, Rabbi Bar Chanan who explained, Shahalach lahavi kvasim Chevron. He went to go bring sheep from Chevron. That's why he went there. Now, why would he go to Chevron to get sheep? So in Tanya, we learned in the Mishnah text, Elim, rams, Mimoyav. He went to get rams from Moyav, which is the best there is, and kvasim and sheep mechevron, which seems to be the best place to get sheep. Now, if it's the best place to get sheep, it would seem that it's got lots of fertile land, giving us good sheep. So if Avshalom goes to Chevron to get sheep, because that's the best place to get sheep, why would you indicate and state that Chevron is full of rocks? Seemingly, it's got a lot more going on. Says the Gemara, Minei ID, from your very statement, you're giving me the answer. And we can deduce the klisha'ara, that because the land is weak, therefore, of the raya, they made it a place for pasturing sheep, because they don't want to pasture sheep in there. Like your argument actually just defends the case. You're saying they went to Chevron to get sheep? Exactly. Why would you go get sheep from the wheat field? No one wants the sheep hanging out in the wheat field. Send the sheep to where the rocks are, where there's very little grass, and the sheep can survive on that. And the Shem and Kinyana, and moreover, the sheep do well taking from the small, tight grass rather than going to the big wheat fields and destroying our wheat fields. So your argument stating that if Avshalom went to Chevron to pick up sheep doesn't undermine our argument, actually supports it.
So then maybe Zone wasn't in Goshen.
We're talking about Chevron.
I'm just saying what I asked before.
Why not?
Zone because it was good for cattle. It wasn't good
No,
for
who said so? It was good for cattle.
No, it's nothing, not
We're talking about Chevron.
Like I mentioned before, whether or not Zone was in.
Right, but there's no mention here of soya being good for cattle.
Back to what I asked earlier.
No, I know that, but there's no mention here of soya being good for cattle.
No, good for agriculture.
Okay, so why would that not be in Goshen? Could be in Goshen. I have no idea.
No, I'm just saying.
I don't think there's any indication. I don't think there's any indication one way or the other.
Good for agriculture. Perhaps good for the animals. And for Goshen was more for animals rather than.
There's no indication that soya would have been good for animals.
Sheep and mule is such a good.
One second. I'm going to make sure I think we're missing something. There's no indication here in the Gemara that soya is good for animals. There's no indication of that.
Well, I think it said in the verses in the Torah.
That.
Bring your. You have a lot of cattle, so go to Goshen, right?
Oh.
Go to Goshen. It's the best land for cattle. It's a
Right.
large, I don't know what that means exactly. It just meant it was a large area.
Right.
Not
Okay, you were
like
talking about
animals.
that. Okay. I thought you were referencing the Gemara that we just said.
No,
Here the Gemara is talking about Chevron, good for
I'm
cattle.
just thinking
You're
back.
saying that if they sent their cattle to Goshen, then Goshen would have also been rocks and things, but we know Goshen is very fertile because that's where the Nile meets. We know that it was the most fertile of lands. Presumably, it's good for cattle there because of the space.
Right.
But in Chevron, in Israel, where you're tight for space, you got to send the sheep to where there's no wheat fields. Maybe that's a good point, and I'm not gonna. That's a good point. Here the Gemara is indicating send cattle to a place which is not fertile, whereas in Goshen, the Gemara says, the Torah says, send sheep to the fertile land. Very good point. And you know what? On the spiritual level, maybe we can explain that. I was going to suggest that sheep indicate are also humility. Right? Sheep are docile. Right? They also indicate a kind of humility. But like the Alter Rebbe writes in the Torah, when he describes the spiritual message of the Karbanis, the offerings in the temple, and it says there are three types of cattle that can become offering, right? Sheep, goats, and cattle, and
Ox. Cattle, yeah.
not ox, cows,
bulls.
right. So and he goes to explain that these are three different types of Yetzer Haras, three different types of animal souls. Some that are more like sheep, they're docile, and they just have no self-confidence, just follow the pack. You have the goats who are hyper. You have the bulls that are more aggressive. All types of animal souls. So maybe then we're talking about sheep here. There's two different kinds of sheep. We're talking about rectification of character, Chevron versus Egypt, right? So, and getting back to the point we mentioned a few days ago, that a character isn't neither good nor bad, depending on how you use it. So being a sheep, being docile, can be either an animal soul in Egypt, where it's stuffed with just, I'll just go wherever it's better for me. Just give me, and whatever, I'll follow the pack this way, follow the pack that way, as long as I can get all the fertility I want, all the food I want, versus the sheep of the sheep of Chevron is built on rocks that are humble. So it's the virtuous version of the same character. Maybe that's the answer. In Egypt, the animal soul, the sheep, is all selfish. Yep, let's roam the place with tons of fertility and take. Versus the same characteristic, the sheep in Chevron is humble. The spiritual level, maybe I can answer that. On the literal level, I don't know if I have an answer for that question. But maybe on this deeper spiritual reading, that might be an explanation. The same character used either in the humble sense or the animal soul sense. Chevron being the antidote to Egypt. Yeah,
I would send sheep to a barren land.
that's what he's saying here.
Yeah.
Right, they're sending it to Chevron, which is barren. Let them go eat the grass there. And they did.
And their sheep manure is excellent fertilizer.
Sorry.
Sheep manure is an excellent fertilizer.
Yeah.
They sell it all over.
Yeah. Oh, I want to add one more thing to this point. When the Gemara describes that the cattle go to Chevron and they do well, the verse says "V'shamin kinyana," which means there's different ways you can translate these words, but it could be that the sheep themselves become fat, or it's like what you acquire becomes fat, meaning your property. No, are we talking about? Yeah, exactly. Right, which could indicate that the fatness, so to speak, of the sheep in Chevron is not for the sheep themselves, but to their master. Again, with this humility, that if it's serving the master, then all the fat, all the good, is not about me anymore. It's about the master. But that's humility. Maybe, Harry, maybe right. Follow what I'm saying? Meaning, a person has to be able to say proudly, "I'm a Jew." Not focus not on I, focus on Jew. It's Hashem's power that I'm saying I, not I. So the fat of the sheep is not the sheep. It's Kinyana, it's the master. Maybe. Okay, God willing, tomorrow I'm going to New York, B'ezrat Hashem. It's my brother-in-law's yard site tomorrow. So we're going there to New York, and we'll be back, God willing. Ooh, it's a while. My brother-in-law. It's his first yard site, and we'll be back, God willing, Wednesday morning. So it's a little bit of a break. And then we will pick up further on our discussion about the spy's ill intent in these kinds of mistake. A wonderful day, Eden.
Thank you, Rabbi.